Hello everyone, welcome to Sabbath School Gems, where each week we showcase key concepts from this week's Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath School lesson. Hello and welcome to another episode of Sabbath School Gems. This is Lesson 6 for the fourth quarter for 2021 for Sabbath, November 6th. And it's titled, For What Nation Is There So Great? And it's from the quarterly Present Truth in Deuteronomy. And there's a lot to get to in here, so I'm going to try to go through it, and I'm going to go through it in the order that's in the quarterly. It starts out with Moses addressing the people, so this is Deuteronomy 4:8, and it says, And what nation is so great that has statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law? That's Torah, which I set before you this day. And that's the memory verse, but right before that is a statement that goes like this in verse 7. It says, For what great nation is there that God is so near to it, as the Lord our God is to us, for whatever reason we may call upon him? And I think that's really important to point that out, because it's before the law, before the talk about the law and the righteous and the judgments, is this idea that God is near to them. Because remember, I had talked about this in a previous Gems about the triplet pattern, and I even got some feedback that maybe I kind of ran that too long talking about that. But I really think that pattern shows up, especially many places in Deuteronomy, sometimes even within the same chapter. And it's that pattern that we talked about of it starting with the Lord saying, see what I have done for you. Acknowledge my love. See, if it's a man proposing to a wife, it's, see this diamond ring as a token of all the good things that I want to give you, that this is just a token of it. And then it's followed by the next one, which I call B, and that's the invitation. And will you enter into this covenant with me? Will you make me your one and only God and enter into this covenant? And then there's C, which talks about obeying and following the laws, and I will instruct you, and you will respect me and obey me. It's kind of a natural outflow of that. So we see the same kind of pattern, because it's talking about the God that's near to them. And then it's, look at what a great nation that has these statutes and judgments. So I see it as kind of a similar pattern. And this pattern is all throughout Deuteronomy. So later on in this chapter, in verses 12 through 14, it's the same pattern. In verse 12, it says, And the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of the words, but saw no form, only a voice. Well, they didn't see the form because nobody could see God. I mean, even when he showed his glory to Moses, he had to hide him in the cleft of the rock. So yes, they didn't see his form, but they heard it. And it says, and they lived through it, because in Deuteronomy 4:33, it says, Did any people ever see the voice of God speak out of the midst of the fire as you have and lived? You see, what God is saying is, look, I spoke to you. I spoke to you and protected you, because he was protecting them so that they lived. He's showing, look, I want to get close to you. And then in verse 13, it says, So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform, the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tables of stone. Now this text is a little bit confusing. We have to go look at it. It says, he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you. That word commanded is not a good word, I think. It's really he charged you. It's like he charged you to enter into this relationship. It says commanded to perform. That sounds like, you're dictating that this monkey perform a certain thing. But it's really more of he charged you, he asked you, he's making this proposal to enter into this covenant. And then it says, and then the 10 commandments, and he wrote them on 2 tables of stone. Well, that word too, commandment, is not in there. It's the 10 dabar, it's the 10 words. It's actually words or spoken matters, but it's really words of the covenant. So that's that 10 words of the covenant. Now, we don't really know what's written on those tables of stone, and I know some people think that they know exactly what's written on it, but the fact is we don't have those tables of stone today, and they could be 10 literal words on there as far as we know. And I know, Ellen White saw visions of it and things. And that's fine. If you want to believe that you know exactly what's on those tables of stone, that's fine. But it's still, whatever's on there is not a list of items you have to do, like a tit for tat. It is the covenant. It's the 10 words of the covenant, whatever that is. Maybe, you know, you follow me and make me your one and only God, and I will be a God to you. And, it's kind of like in a marriage, I guess it would be, you say your vows, you say, yes, I will take this person to be my lawfully wedded spouse for the rest of my life or whatever. And so it's kind of like that. It's like, that's just the very beginning. That's just the vows. And so I think that's how I view those 10 words. So what he's really saying is he declared to you his covenant, which he invited you to enter into with him, and he wrote it on these tables of stone. And then the last one in verse 14, and the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that you might observe them in the land which you go over to possess. And this is kind of like the marriage now. Now you're living with the person, you're getting to know them, and you're pleasing them. And every day you're waking up, how can I please them? And God is giving us good things, and we're listening to him and doing what he wants. And so that's what that is with the statutes and the judgments. So I think this whole passage is not what the lesson says. It says, so now Israel, because of what I have done for you, you must obey the following. And that just sounds misleading, because it sounds like, look at what I did for you. So now you owe me. You have to obey me. And I mean, if a man said that to me and said, look it, I got you this diamond ring, I did these things, and now you have to marry me, I think a woman would be running far the other way, because I don't think that's how it goes. I think it really is God saying, look at all these beautiful, wonderful things that I want to do for you. Look at the things I've already done for you. When you enter in this covenant relationship, it means that I'm going to be your only God. You're going to listen to me. You're not going to listen to anybody or any other God. And you're going to be listening to me, and I'm going to be teaching you statutes and judgments, and you're going to be doing them. Lovingly and willingly do them. So now on Sunday, it goes into the do not add or take away. And that comes from verse 2 of chapter 4 in Deuteronomy. It says, you shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I commanded you. There's reasons we can think of for not wanting to alter them. I mean, Deuteronomy 4:1, just the verse right before, says, now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live. So, I mean, these are life-giving instructions. These aren't just some suggestions. In Psalm 19, it says, the law, the Torah of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The commandment, the mitzvah of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. So you can see how these commandments that God are giving are life-giving. They're defining how his universe operates. And if we work within that, we're going to have his blessing and his protection, because we're living in alignment with how his universe was made. It's not, to me, when it says don't add or take from it, that it's this complete checklist. I mean, we know that. We know, like, it doesn't say do not smoke cigarettes or do not take drugs or things like that. It's not intended to be a checklist. In fact, just the fact that it's saying don't take from it or don't add to it, it's really proving that it isn't a checklist. It wasn't meant to be a checklist. What it is meant to be is instruction straight from God. I mean, that's what it is. You don't change or alter instructions from God. He says what he says. I mean, he told Abraham to leave his home, and he left. He told Noah to build the ark, and he built it, and he gave him the instructions, and he followed it with the detail. And, we can see this better today than I think they could see it back then, because just think, if they're hearing this, you shall not add to it or subtract it, and, they're thinking, well, what does that mean? But we can look back in history. We can see exactly what happened. That was the problem that was in Christ's day. There was just a corruption of the law of God. You know, in Matthew 15:2-3, it says, "Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." And then Jesus replies and he says, "Why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition?" And that's exactly what they were doing, not just in this occasion. There's so many occasions where Jesus was trying to show them that you're not keeping God's law. You're not in alignment with God. You're not listening to him. You have all your traditions. You've taken his law and you've turned it into what you think it means. You've made it become a burden to others, and you don't really understand the concept of being in a covenant relationship with God. And I think Jesus was trying to bring that to them, that they thought that they could just follow this checklist that they invented, all these rules and laws that they made, that they twisted, and that somehow that was going to bring them close to God. And that's just not how it works. And, you know, I like the text that's in the lesson study from Ellen White from Selected Messages, Book 2, page 107. It says, Satan has been persevering and untiring in his efforts to prosecute the work he began in heaven to change the law of God. He has succeeded in making the world believe that theory he presented in heaven before his fall, that the law of God was faulty and needed revising. A large part of the professed Christian church, by their attitude, if not by their words, show that they have accepted the same error. And we can see that that's really Satan's method. He likes to distort and destroy and alter. He can't create, but he can twist things. And so he doesn't just throw everything out, but he transforms it and morphs it into something different. And we can see that even with the Jews today. Even the most serious and observant Jews, they often don't know what the Bible says versus what their tradition says. And even if they do, they don't always understand how to weigh them differently. When God said something, I mean, it can be interpreted different ways, but it shouldn't be given the same weight as some rabbi's interpretation of it. And there are a lot of traditions, a lot of things, just like some of their holidays. If you live in the United States, let's say, and you don't live in Israel, you might have to keep 2 days. You know, maybe they don't know exactly when it starts, or you're keeping the day for Israel and here. I don't know the exact justification for all of them, but a lot of times a 1-day holiday will turn into a 2-day holiday. And, you know, that's just not in the Bible. You know, it might seem like a little thing. Well, you're just keeping 2 Sabbath days in a row instead of 1. But when you start altering things like that, it does make a big deal. And, you know, it can turn the things that God gave us into burdens just by altering them slightly. And so we can see that that's the danger of adding to or subtracting from God's law. And then there's the other extreme where people just say, well, all the things that he said, well, that's just all done away with. Well, we can keep certain things, but they just throw it all out. So there's both extremes, adding to it and taking away from it. Going on to Monday, that incident at Baal Peor, and that's in Deuteronomy 4:3-4. And it says, your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor. For the Lord your God destroyed from among you all the men who followed the Baal of Peor. But you who held fast to the Lord your God are all alive today. So what happened there? Well, Satan uses our weakest points to tempt us, and evidently what was happening was the men, the children of Israel, it appears, were going after the daughters of Moab, and they were probably beautiful women, but they were getting corrupted. They were getting invited to some of their religious ceremonies, and pretty soon they're eating their food that's offered to idols and bowing down to their idols and things like that. So it got really bad. There was even some of the chiefs of the people of the children of Israel were doing this. And it got so bad that Moses and the priests and elders were all convened at the tent of meeting. And if you remember, the tent of meeting was set aside outside of the camp. And that was where people were supposed to go to meet with God. So when they wanted to meet with God, they would go out there. And when Moses would go out there, when Moses's face would start to shine, he would go out there because he knew God wanted to meet with him. And the people would just stand in awe. You know, they'd be standing at their tents, at their at their doors of their tents, and they would just watch Moses as he walks to this tent of meeting to meet with God. So it was a real intense time. It's this symbolic of, well, it's not even symbolic. It's God meeting with the people, just like he met with Moses on the mountain, and they couldn't even get near the mountain or they would perish. So this was a big thing. So here this worship and all the stuff going on with the daughters of Moab and all their religious ceremonies and everything was getting so bad that Moses and the priests were meeting at this tent to go to God and to ask him and get atonement for all this. And as they were doing that, a man, which sounds like he was one of the chiefs himself of the children of Israel, came with a daughter of Moab, who herself was a daughter of a chief. So this is high up. This corruption goes way up. And he brings her right in their sight, right in the presence, goes right by them. And that was too much for Aaron's grandson, Phineas. And he just gets filled with this indignation and goes over there and puts a sword through both of them, the man and the woman that he had with him. And it says that at that, God's anger was assuaged. And then it says 24,000 died of the plague. So does this incident sound familiar? It sounds really close to what happened with the golden calf incident. I mean, in there, you remember that they had the golden calf, and then Moses came down from the mountain and he called the Levites to his side. He said, "Who's on the God's side?" And the Levites all came to him, and then they all took their swords and went out and just slew their brother. And there was 3,000 men that were slain that time. And then it says that the Lord plagued the people. So here we have the same thing. Here we have 24,000 people dying of the plague. We have Phineas killing this man and woman. And then with the golden calf, there was 3,000 men that were slain. But then it says the Lord plagued the people. So this is, I think you would call this the unpardonable sin. Although I don't like to say that, but because a lot of people question about what that really is. But if you're blatantly, basically not choosing God, you're choosing to worship other gods, and you're doing it right there, right when God is coming down and meeting with you and wanting to form this covenant. I mean, it's like cheating on your fiance when you're driving to the marriage or something. And it's just a really, really bad thing. And I mean, what can you do at that stage when people are just blatantly disregarding the Lord and his proposal? And it also shows that sin sullies those that are around it, because, just like the Levites had to go out and slay all the people, and then they were, they had to slay the people. I mean, Phineas had to slay, and it's not a small thing. In fact, God said what he did because he kind of dissipated God's wrath, or he kind of did God's work for him. And so he says that he's going to have a continuous priesthood. So that was going to be his reward for what he had done. Because what happens is when people sin, it doesn't just affect them, it affects others around them. And that's why the children of Israel, that's why Moses had to go and ask for forgiveness and atonement from God for the children of Israel. He wasn't asking on behalf of the people that were slayed. They were already dead. The people that the Levites killed, they were already dead. He was asking on behalf of the rest of the people. And I'm sure there was people in there that didn't bow down to the golden calf or whatnot, but they still were part of this group that gets sullied by this. And so you can see how God he can't tolerate it. It's when something is unclean, it's just like if you unintentionally touch a dead body, you become unclean, even though you didn't intend to do it. So it really is a matter of sin just infecting others and God having to take care of that problem. And it sounds harsh, but then when you realize that God just can't exist, I mean, if he doesn't do this, if he doesn't purge the camp, or he doesn't cleanse the people and forgive them and relent of what he's doing, then he can't meet with them. So, and you know, it's God just can't dwell in the presence of evil. And last week's gems, if you remember about the stranger, one thing that I didn't mention in that one is that there's really just two categories. The reason why there's no such thing as stranger within your gates, that we should treat them all the same, is because God really only has two categories. He has people who are following him, that want to enter into covenant relationship with him, and he has those who do not. And there's no other real distinctions. With man, there's no distinctions. God doesn't care if you're rich or poor or this color or that. He's just looking at, do you want to follow him or do you not? And, there's like the clean and the unclean. There's no mixture of that. So in the case of the Baal Peor, there were those that were destroyed and there were those that were alive. They weren't partially dead or partially alive. It says, for the Lord your God destroyed all the men who followed the Baal Peor, but you who held fast to the Lord your God are alive today. So there's just two groups there. And what does that hold fast mean? Well, that's in Tuesday's lesson where it says cleave to the Lord your God. So some translations say hold fast and some say cleave to the Lord. And the lesson brings this out, that this is the same word, the same Hebrew word, when it says that a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. So it's really fitting for this, talk about the covenant type relationship, because that's what it really is. It's joining as one, is cleaving to them, like attaching yourself and not wanting to ever part. It's giving all of ourselves to God and receiving life from him. The lesson says power from him, but I'd like to think of it more as like a vital energy or motivation or inspiration is coming from God. He's directing our path and he's showing us the way. So we're connecting into him. We're being grafted into that vine and getting the nutrients from it. Because I think of like Deuteronomy 6:5, where it says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. That's what I think when it says to cleave to the Lord. And there's even a better text. There's a better text in Deuteronomy 13:4. And this one's really interesting because listen to all these different aspects that it talks about. It says, you shall walk after the Lord your God and fear him and keep his commandments and obey his voice, and you shall serve him and hold fast to him. So look at all these things that are trying to describe this cleaving. It's walk after him. So go forward and following in his footsteps. And then it says to fear him. So we went through that before, where it's reverence, awe, and admiration and like an emotional respect. This is reverencing God as God. And then it's keep his commandments. That word is mitzvah. And that word keep is like cherish or guard or make a protective hedge around. So you're really paying attention to what he's saying. And then obey his voice, which is that shama kol, the hearken unto what God says, to pay attention and to obey and to do and to implement. So it's not just a hearing, but it's really a hearing with an intent to hearken to it. And then the last one is to serve him. Well, that's the second one, to serve him. So to be in bondage to him or to be subject to his will. I mean, Leviticus 24:55, it says, for the children of Israel are servants to me. They are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. That's when it was talking about the Jubilee. It's saying you shouldn't keep these, if you have to keep them beyond their time of release, well, you at least have to release them in the year of Jubilee, because these children of Israel are servants to me only. They're not anyone else's servants. So That's what it means by serve him and then hold fast to him or cleave to him. And that's what, clinging or joining or, I think of Ruth and Naomi. Or newly wedded couples that just don't want to be apart ever. And so you just, and people that have been together for a long time that don't want to ever be apart. I mean, it's really, that's what it means to me when it says to cleave to the Lord your God, to walk after the Lord your God, to fear him, to keep his commandments, to obey his voice, to serve him and hold fast to him. And then going on to Wednesday, for what nation is there so great? And that is coming from Deuteronomy 4, verses 5 and 6. It says, see, I have taught you statutes and rules that you should keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. So I think of this as getting close to God is going to allow him to speak to us. And if we do what he says, others are going to see that, that what God is telling us leads to life. I mean, they're going to be drawn to God too. And I think that's the whole goal, that God wants to draw all men to himself. And, what a contrast it is to today, for professed followers of God who just want to extract out a few items that God told Moses and just want to dismiss the rest. I mean, if we really trust in him, and we're going to see that the things that he has in the Bible, even things that we might not understand why it's in there, but it's going to be proven true. And we've already seen things be proven true. And so if we don't see certain things, at least we can rest on the faith that that they're in there for a reason. I mean, I've seen pastors, even high up in leadership and stuff in the church, who have spoken from the pulpit and dismissed some of the statutes and judgments. They say, oh, they're just antiquated, or that was discriminatory against women or something. And I think that's really that's really dangerous, I think, to just dismiss these things that God had said just because we don't understand them or we misinterpret them. Because we are the living ones that can bring life to what God says and show others that by living by what God says, we can be an example to others. I think of the vegetarians in Loma Linda, and when they did the Adventist Health Study 1, and they found out that the Adventists were like one of the longest living groups of people. If you're looking at groups, they're one of the longest living groups in the world. And I think that brought a lot of attention to the world stage. It's like, what are these Adventists doing to live long? Who doesn't want to live a long, healthy life? And so, they started asking questions like, what kind of diet are they eating? And, where did they get that from? And unfortunately, of course, with Health Study 2 is probably going to prove the opposite, because when people started to look into the Adventists and see, these Adventists were going to church, and they had family and God as importance in their life, and they were also eating a plant-based diet and nuts and lots of good vegetables and things. But I think then they saw that, but now the Adventists are kind of abandoned a lot of that, and they're not living as long. And so, it's actually, in that case, it's a negative witnessing. And I think that's what could happen with the children of Israel, or what did happen to them, or could happen without God, is that if they are professed people following God, but then they're really not following God, but the outside world doesn't really know that, but they just see, they're following God, look what's happening to them, then they could get a negative impression. I mean, that's what Moses was worried about when he said to God, don't destroy these people, because, in the eyes of the Egyptians, we came out to worship our God, and it's going to make you look bad. And so I think we have to be careful about that. And I think if we do follow what God says, and he's going to teach us so much more, but we can at least follow the things that he has given to us and the knowledge that he's shown us, that we will be living examples to others. And I think the thing that we have to remember is that God is the one that loved first. And he didn't love us just because, there's something intrinsic in us. So this whole title of this, What Nation Is There So Great? Well, it just reminds me of Deuteronomy 7:7, where it says, the Lord did not set his love on you nor choose you because you were more in number than any other people, for you were the least of all peoples, but because the Lord loves you. So God is the one who gives us the opportunity to enter into covenant with him first. He loves us first, and then he asks us. So it's not like the children of Israel were not some great nation. They just had a great God. And Thursday's lesson talks about your wisdom and your understanding. So that goes along with that text we just read. Deuteronomy 4:6. Keep them and do them, for that they will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who when they hear all these statutes will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Now the lesson says that the statutes and judgments themselves were not what contained the wisdom and understanding, but it was wisdom and understanding came from their keeping the statutes and judgments, from their obeying them. So that the obedience was their wisdom and understanding. And I'm not sure I exactly understand that, because I think of it as God was their wisdom and their understanding, not necessarily their obedience. But it is true that the relationship comes first. I mean, the agreement to enter into the covenant then is followed by the listening, the Shema Kol. But I think, like it says in Psalms 111, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A good understanding have all those who do. So the fear of the Lord comes first. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of of wisdom. And then it says a good understanding have all those who do. So the first is the fear, the reverence, the awe of God, the respect, the entering into the covenant, and then the doing afterwards. So in other words, the works come after the faith. And their outward acts, though, whether they got the instruction directly from God or through Moses, it is their outward acts, though, is what other people see. Other people see our outward acts, and that is what can show others that God's law is good and right, and that God is to be loved and trusted, and that he knows what's best, and he can give us life, and he can give us a good life here, but that's just a token of the better life that he has in mind for us in his kingdom. And I like that quote that was in the lesson, Christ Objects lesson, page 288, where it says, their obedience to the law of God would make them marvels of prosperity before the nations of the world. He who could give them wisdom and skill in all cunning work would continue to be their teacher and would ennoble and elevate them through obedience to his laws. If obedient, they would be preserved from the diseases that afflicted other nations and would be blessed with vigor of intellect. The glory of God, his majesty and power were to be revealed in all their prosperity. They were to be a kingdom of priests and princes. God furnished them with every facility for being the greatest nation on the earth. And I mean, do we think that following God's instructions today can bring the same? I think so. I mean, I think Satan's biggest victory is just in getting people to dismiss what God has instructed man in the past, and to such a point that they can't even hear what he's instructing them today. So I think that following God does bring blessing, but really the following comes after the faith. It comes after our desire for him and our desire to enter into a covenant relationship with him, a close relationship where we can hear him. So I guess just to wrap up in summary, the children of Israel were great because God chose them. He chose them first. And he chose to offer them the covenant, which he is offering us today. And then he instructs them. Then when we hear him and we listen to him, then he instructs us into wisdom and understanding. And I think the second point that we made is that we should be careful not to dismiss what God has relayed to Moses on the mountain. I mean, every syllable that he even uttered, I think, is important, but also not to change or distort it, because that may be even worse. And I guess the other thing that was brought out in this lesson is just, are we cleaving to the Lord? Are we loving him with all our heart and all our soul and strength and never wanting to let go? And I think that's what entering a covenant relationship is like. I mean, that's what a marriage relationship is like anyway. You go into it with the intention never to part. And if we enter this covenant and allow God to speak his laws to us and write them on our innermost being in our heart, and I think that we can't help but be good witnesses to others. I mean, even those who don't choose God or his kingdom, I mean, they can still fear and tremble. I think they can still acknowledge and see that God's ways are right. That, if you follow God, that he is a loving God and that he intends to teach us how to be free of diseases and all these problems that we have. And even if we still have the problems, because there's still going to be sin and sin's still going to affect other people, but he wants to give us his promises for a better life and a life in his kingdom as he intended it. So that's this week's Gems. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk again next time. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Sabbath School Gems. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word to others. Comments and questions can be sent to us at sabbathschoolgems@gmail.com. Bye for now.